Rudy's revelation.
This is a conspiracy. That's what this is.
Hey everyone, welcome to a quick truncated episode, Rudy's Revelation. Thanks for joining me. I am back just temporarily. I'm going to try to do a Tuesdays with Perry episode tonight, and we'll see how that goes. I won't be back till full schedule till next week. I will have an episode tomorrow, but not Thursday. And maybe Friday, but we're going to start or restart next week, full schedule, every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. Thanks for joining me today. All right, so today, we're going to talk a little bit about James Comey, the former disgraced FBI director, who has now been indicted on federal charges for obstruction, which is the big one. But we're going to talk about that and how that's just really scratching the surface, tip of the iceberg type of thing. And we know what the crime is and why he's responsible for that crime and so forth and so on. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties this past week with the episodes I do get up or try to go live with, and I'm going to be correcting all this shit in the new future because there is issue with the video. It locks up and it skips frames and does all this wonky stuff that I can't really correct until I get a new laptop. So next few episodes, bear with me for that. So we're also going to talk about Trump is touting, or the U.S. touting of federal job reductions. And for those of us on the conservative side, this is great news. However, this is the canary in the coal mine. This is the loss of jobs due to AI. Most of the administrative jobs that are being gotten rid of are administrative jobs that their jobs can easily be done through AI, and that's where the federal government is going. I don't have a problem with that per se. However, we're seeing the same things in the private sector. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Also, fighting crimes in blue cities. Will the U.S. be able to prosecute crime in all its forms while the Democratic Party flaunts fragrant abuses, corruption, and urges violence? We have these blue cities. They don't want to enforce crime, and they've been a couple glaring examples recently. But we've seen the recidivism of people let back on the street who are violent or have committed serious crimes, or let back on the street, and then they continue to victimize folks. So we're going to talk about that as well. So let's get into the headlines for today, and I'm going to make it quick. The next half hour or so, going to go through some of these headlines for today, September 30th, last day of September 2025. We're going to start with the Wall Street Journal. This is breaking news today. YouTube to pay $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit brought by Donald Trump. The Google subsidiary, YouTube, is the last of three big tech companies to resolve personal litigation Trump filed against social media platforms. So basically what you see here, in not so many words, they're settling a lawsuit so they don't have to admit liability. Why is that, and why is that even important? Because it's the liability. that they would have to admit that here's your fascism. It's corporate fascism, where large Silicon Valley corporations teamed up with the federal government to suppress the free speech of Americans, American citizens, including the President of the United States and his re-election campaign, et cetera, et cetera. Crime of the fucking century. There's your fascism, your corporate fascism. So when the because that's all there's left of fascism. There have been a lot of very important scholars out there saying that fascism, the 1930s fascism and Hitler Hitler doesn't exist. Nazis don't exist. And that sort of fascism doesn't exist anymore. And I've gone down that road plenty of times to talk about what that sort of fascism was, the pillars of authoritarianism that work together to suppress people, oppress people. But now you only have corporations with government, because corporations don't need anybody else, really. They corrupt everybody else, including government, but they don't need anybody else besides government to oppress the people. So why this isn't surprising, YouTube to settle with Donald Trump for $24.5 million, just like all the other media companies and social media companies having to settle because Trump was wronged. Not because he was president, but because that's the most example, and you might have heard this very often before. If they could do it to Trump, they could do it to you. And they do. So we're going to get into a little crime fighting mode here. So there are plenty of people out there who don't like ICE. And there was a meme going around just to change it to the National Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency. And that would be nice. And it would be a great play on words, euphemism. I thought that was a little amusing. But in any case, a lot of people out there don't like ICE because ICE is actually doing their job. What are they doing? It's law enforcement. So, and people in that industry consider it law enforcement because that's what it is. They're laws, and they enforce those laws. You see, a law without enforcement mechanism is no law. So it's on there on paper, but if you can't enforce it, then people don't have to obey the law. You can see this would be perfect illustration would be speeding, right? You're speeding down the road, right? If there's no one there to have a speed trap or to pull you over, you can speed all you want. No one's going to stop you. And no one's going to cite you or give you a citation for it. All right, so Fox News, I've already blabbered on enough. Fox News, Chicago anti-ICE agitator faces federal charges after threatening to kill an ICE agent. Paul Ivory allegedly participated in protests outside an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois. That's in suburbs of Chicago over the weekend. Right? You can't threaten law enforcement. You can't really threaten anybody. But there's there's a hurdle there when you're threatening a citizen, a fellow citizen or another person outside of law enforcement, that you would have to have the means to carry that out. Like if you told somebody, I'm going to burn you up with a flamethrower and you don't own a flamethrower, that's not considered a credible threat. However, threats against law enforcement don't need that pretext. It doesn't matter. You could say, if you say anything threatening to law enforcement, that's considered a legitimate threat and you could be cited for it. So there you go. So in any case, I was trying to say that there are plenty of people out there that are upset with ICE because they're deluded. Look, if you don't like what the law is, you can change the law. But like Mr. Democrat, Mr. Democracy, democracy is like herding cats. You can't move forward, you can't progress without some sort of majority. And so that's why you have things constantly split and why there's a battle, political battle in the United States government, particularly in the legislature. Excuse me. This is it. So what we have in America is not, see, America is already susceptible to high levels of crime because of the freedom that this country provides. Can cloak people's illegal activities. So you have freedom from surveillance, you have freedom for privacy and all these things. So you could use that to cover up your crimes, etc. Yeah, I'm not getting a feed again, so I don't even know if this is even going through. All right, so bear with me if you will, if you can. I don't know. I don't have anybody following along right now. I know this is way off timing. I just wanted to get an episode up today to try to work through any kinks. All right. Next headline here. Defense of gun-toting illegal superintendent could undermine former Obama staffer Senate campaign. So this Democrat, Jackie Norris, who oversaw Des Moines, Iowa school board and is defending Ian Andre Roberts, who is an illegal immigrant from Uganda, right? Or is it Guyana? Guyana. So this guy who has been, I'm going to go through the story in a second, but you can see that he's an illegal immigrant who's been here since 1999, so that's over 25 years, and has not fraudulently, he did get all the education, I assume, but does not have a work permit, has an order of removal, and is an illegal immigrant, shouldn't be in the country. So he's taking a six-figure job away from somebody who is a legal citizen here. And that's the point. So don't get misled by what some of the Democrats are saying or what some of the other media companies are saying. All right. Jackie Norris, who used to work with Obama, but who oversaw the Des Moines, Iowa school board for several years, while a legal immigrant named Ian Andre Roberts ran Des Moines public schools, has rushed to defend Roberts publicly as he faces removal proceedings from immigration services. The Department of Homeland Security said Roberts was found in possession of a loaded handgun, not allowed by non-citizens, $3,000 in cash, which I guess is allowed, and a fixed blade hunting knife. I should get mine, just to show. But I don't want to be a cause of threatening anybody, but, hunting knife is serious business. So, in any case, nowhere in her statement did Norris address the fact that Immigration and Customs Enforcement said on Saturday that the agency had arrested Roberts after he sped away from officers in his vehicle during a target enforcement operation last Friday. He abandoned his vehicle near a wooded area. Moreover, the vehicle was issued to him by the school district, so he got a free car by the school district. He's not even supposed to be here, and that's the point. And the point behind it is not only, we're going to get to it in a second, not only is he a criminal, we'll tell you why, for overstaying visas, not only, but other things, and he is an illegal immigrant, so he's taking that six-figure job away from somebody, maybe a person of color, who also has their credentials to be superintendent of schools of Des Moines. All right. Story goes on to say, from Just the News, according to ICE, Roberts had existing weapons possession charges from 2020, from 5 years ago. It was issued a removal order by an immigration judge on May 2024. So even though he committed a crime and he wasn't here legally, it still took 4 years to issue a removal order for this guy. So there are a lot of people in the judicial system knew that this guy was an illegal immigrant, but still he sat at the post of superintendent of schools, even though he had a legal gun charge. Oh, well, it's just because he's here. He shouldn't be have the status of illegal. Well, he is. He does. And that's the point. The law says no. So the law says no, then change the law if you don't like what the law says. But we're a country, and as Winston said to John Wick, rules. Without them, we live with the animals. So, and it's what democracy is democracy, direct democracy isn't what democracy is. All right, direct democracy is one person, one vote, which is good. I have nothing against that aspect of that procedure. But democracy, particularly is in the legislature, your representatives and senators, representatives of the state, get to vote on legislature, which determine things like what constitutes a legal immigrant and obviously a citizen and so forth and so on. All right. Story goes on. School board said that it had no knowledge of the removal orders issued in 2024. Doesn't matter. You knew he was illegal. No one here was aware of any citizenship or immigration issues that Dr. Roberts may have been facing. Nobody believes that. The school board said in a statement, the board also repeated, because that would be admitting illegality if they knew he was an illegal immigrant and they put him in the post anyway. The board also repeatedly pushed back on the accusations that they were aware of Roberts' illegal status when he was hired. I believe they were. Post-millennial, 2 arrested as Antifa terrorists clash with Portland police federal officers outside ICE facility. 2 people were arrested on Sunday, a 17-year-old with 4th-degree assault and a 38-year-old man for 3rd-degree assault. We should have his name. ICE supporters also gathered as the events took place. Protesters in the favor of immigration enforcement officers, some Antifa militants, and they are militants. They're not just standing out there with signs, which is perfectly legal, right? But if you're there with any sort of shield or weaponry, means you're not there to protest peacefully. Some Antifa militants also attempted to block federal officers from getting into the ICE facility. That in itself is a federal crime. Now hundreds of agitators, including Antifa mob. And then let's just move over to the Mirror. 10 ICE agents try and fail to catch a delivery cyclist as he made speedy getaway. So this guy, he said he was a legal immigrant. Might very well have been. And it doesn't matter. It was a Keystone Cops moment. The point is, they went to try to catch him and they missed. It didn't look good. So usually with people like that, the guy thought he could catch him, but he didn't cut the angle. You never run directly after somebody. You cut the angle because they're going to have to make a turn. And the guy was bicycling towards the crowd. They knew he would have had to make a left turn, but he didn't cut the angle. And so it looked like a Keystone Cops moment in any case. PJ Media, Portland's love affair with Antifa grows deeper. Mayors vow to fight them. And against ICE, like I'm saying, people don't like this. Change the law. You can't just ignore federal law. That in itself is a crime. If you aid people into evading federal law, that in itself is crime. Becomes a conspiracy. So they're treading very lightly here with these mayors, including Ted Wheeler, how that worked out for him when he was turned on by Antifa. And oddly, mayors like Portland's Keith Wilson pleaded for Portlanders to treat the National Guard members with respect, but they said our friends and our neighbors have stood, and friends and neighbors who work with ICE get firebombed while standing down the Portland Police Department. The point is this is what I'm saying. You're either for justice, not just law enforcement. You're for law enforcement, which mets out its own justice. So the Justice Department works with law enforcement. This is how the court system works, and mets out justice. Some of it might not be just, like if a person that didn't commit a crime gets wrongly convicted and has to serve prison time and or especially get executed. I'm not for the death penalty, only because I'm for life. So I'm not for abortion. I'm not for the death penalty. I'm not for killing. I understand the conservative nature of wanting the death penalty, and obviously the vengeful, vindictive idea about it, but I stick to my morals, right? Killing is bad unless trying to defend yourself or your loved ones or the little piece of dirt that you might be occupying. Personal space. So that's my issue. And what I'm trying to point out here today is ICE is enforcing federal law. And blue cities aren't even meting out justice. So the people on the ground, law enforcement may be apprehending people who, I don't know, stab innocent young girls on subway trains. But then the judicial system lets these people out. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But one other leg to this conspiracy is the large corporations. Let me put it this way. NGOs, not-for-profit, want to help the indigent, but end up putting criminals back on the street to commit more crime. And see, do you know what the percentage rate of recidivism is for people that commit crimes and are let back out on the street? It actually goes up if they don't serve any punishment. So if you let someone out on bail or give them probation or whatever, and they tend to go out and commit more crime. That's what recidivism is. But in any case, the Federalist has this article, the takedown of the NGO industrial complex start with nonpartisan voter registration. They say, and what they're talking about there, the charitable voter registration industry, which is NGOs that are pushing for democracy, moveon.org, all these places. It's for democracy, direct democracy, one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote, one citizen, one vote. They are actually Democrats, so they get people to register as a Democrat, and that appears to give them agency, but it's not really what they're doing here. What they're doing here is they're getting people in the Democratic pipeline and said, now you have agency. However, what the Federalist is proposing is no more party-affiliated NGOs that go out there to register voters, which means you have to be unaffiliated. And that should be, I believe in this law, is that when you register, you can affiliate. You can only affiliate after you've been registered. So I don't know, there should be a time period there, right? So you register and then you have to wait a month or whatever before you register for a party. That would get the partisan nature out of supposed pro-democracy NGOs, which is another one of these legs for the liberal party. So there are the street thugs, Antifa. There's the NGO, which funds all the money for all the protests and everything. There's a protest culture. There's the overall arc and culture itself, which is fed by academia and putting out these indoctrinated cult members. And then, of course, you have the larger political structure on top, the DNC, right? And then above that, you have the corporate political structure above the DNC. And then even above that, you have the corporate non-political structure. Because if you ever work for a corporation, it's not a fucking democracy, right? If you work for a union, you might have some democracy there, but working for a corporation is no democracy. It's a dictatorship with the CEO on top. So, but that's what they want. And so they just corrupt it down through, with money politically, and that's how you get corporate fascism. And it happens on the right too. And it was traditionally the corporate structure had a stranglehold on the conservative or the Republican Party, specifically surrounding, they wanted low taxes, which was very successful for a while, but they didn't care about culture. But then when they wanted to change the culture, they had to move over to the left. And it doesn't matter. The owners of corporations are all hidden behind walls of secrecy and holding companies and so forth. All right, back to the news. Post-millennial. FBI informant revealed to be a serial killer who tricked feds, murdered up to 50 people, former agent says. Scott Kimball admitted to killing all these people. This is a bunch of bullshit from the FBI. The FBI uses criminal elements as assets all the time. How do you think they infiltrate criminal organizations? Is through criminals. So, but they use those criminals for, and including killers, for a number of different missions. And so, sure, you have federal agents, you have FBI agents, but the real seedy part of the FBI is using criminal elements. And so does the DNC and left-wing organizations. They use criminal elements, and it's always been that thing, oh, to control the criminal element is more important than stopping the criminal element. Other headline here, Zero Hedge, judge reinstates fired professor who called Charlie Kirk Nazi. And this is, I'm going to bring this headline back in. This is another leg. So I talked about academia already, but you also have within the justice system, you have the NGOs, you have academia, you have the bigger political structure, the corporate political structure above that. You have your foot soldiers with Antifa and other left-wing thugs in the street. But you also have in the justice system, left-wing radical judges. And here you have it. Judge reinstates fired professor who called Charlie Kirk a Nazi. Why he should be reinstated? First of all, it's a private decision. Unless it was I don't think it was, a community college, a state college, might have been. But if it was a private college, what does the judge have to say about whether you fire somebody for a political stance that one of its crazy left-wing academics had? Like I said, cult members because they all use the same language. So Nazi, right, or fascist, any of these terms, where they're coming from, because Nazism for all intents and purposes doesn't exist. You have neo-Nazis, the far fringe group they're not many people who actually idolize Hitler and don't like Jews or blacks or whatever. The kind of the KKK thing, that doesn't really exist too much. So Charlie Kirk was not a Nazi, right? He was a conservative commentator who started a corporation, TPUSA, that got a lot of conservative donors interested. He got a lot of money, and he went around to campuses contradicting the academia's line about how the left wing is all about social justice, and then the right wing is a bunch of fascists. Where do you think all these kids learn fascism and these words and stuff, and Nazi? This all comes from left-wing academia. They didn't just see it in a chat room. And of course, all these left-wing academics were trained by older left-wing academics that saw everything in the post-war era as clearly defined by the evils of World War II, which is Hitler and the Nazis, versus, the Jews or everybody else. But they totally skip over Stalin, which did far worse than Hitler ever did. And of course, Mao. And this is all post-war era as well, but they totally disregard that. And we saw it with Hanoi Jane and this kind of thinking that, the left is bad, but the right, or the right is bad, but the left is good, is justified. It's all academic mind watching. All right, PJ Media. Grieving father's powerful house testimony after career criminal kills his daughter. Well, you know who this guy is? This guy is Stephen Federico. You might have seen the tape. And he's the father of Logan Federico, a 22-year-old woman from Waxhaw, North Carolina. So she was visiting friends in Colombia, and then they went out, and then she stayed over her friend's house, and somebody broke in. He pulled her out of her bed. The intruder pulled her out of her bed naked and forced her to her knees. She was begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father. This is him giving congressional testimony. But it was all in vain. The man shot Logan, execution style, in the head. The body was left on the floor for several hours before someone found her. The man was out committing more crimes an hour later, using Logan's debit card on a spending spree, stole a car, etc. This is a 30-year-old lifelong criminal, Alexander Devontae Dickey. The night alone, he stole a car, broke into another home, stole keys, guns, and a wallet. Probably the gun used in the slaying. Oh, before I go into this other thing, I just want to say about Stevens Dickey's testimony. He was crying and stuff. The point of that last article is the criminal, Alexander Devontae Dickey, had 64 priors or whatever, 18 of those felonies, and he was back out in the street to commit, and I talked about this before, recidivism. Commit more crime, and this time resulting in a murder. See, here's a perfect illustration how policing small crime prevents large crime. Perfect example. So he is a criminal. So he was obviously on probation, but breaking into houses and stealing cars. And he broke into a house and he stole a gun. So now he's got a loaded gun. Now he's got a weapon. So his breaking and entering, his burglary, turns into murder. So the other is a prior, the other is a felony, the prior is a felony, but murder obviously is more heinous. And then I quickly wanted to go, the last leg of this not being able to fight crime strategy because they're totally blind to the unintended consequences of their actions. Last leg is attached to Wikipedia and the media and NGOs and everything else out there is Wikipedia, reliable sources, perennial sources where they name CNN and MSNBC and all these liars out there. They're used as sources for their online encyclopedia. And then they go on to talk about deprecated sources, which is sources obviously that are deprecated that they don't really trust, but they use anyway. Sometimes. Federalist. Speaking of the media, Margaret Brennan suggests Antifa cells shooting people dead are really more of an ideology. The questions from Face the Nation. So if you didn't know what this is, I watch Face the Nation every week, relatively religiously, but she had Rand Paul on, and they were talking about domestic terrorism and all this stuff and calling Antifa a terrorist group, which they are. The basic thing is they are a militant wing of the Democratic Party, the progressive, the far left progressive radical party, that wing of that party. But they're not an idea. Well, the thing is that's the confusing is because that's what the FBI said. It's an ideology, anti-fascist. It's not. They're anarchists that are, again, loosely bound in a conspiracy of left-wing progressive thinking. But there is an organization, Antifa, that do have members. But the overarching militant organization encompasses anarchists of all types and all political affiliations and no political affiliation. But when Antifa sets the ground for something, the other anarchist groups that are all just the same, I'll go along with it. All right, I got to finish up here. All right, just the news. We're going to get into Comey now. Comey's indictment centers on the truth of authorizing his friends and advisors to leak to the media. So this is the idea of what Comey did. So I knew this at the time when he was giving the testimony. He testified that he didn't leak information, but he gave the information to a trusted friend who then leaked the information. So he's playing cat and mouse here. And this is what I said earlier. That friend had to have some sort of classified credentials, right? Because the information that he was sharing with this person was classified. You can't just call the media, say, here, and releasing it is illegal. And so he did it in such a way that he thought he'd protect himself from charges, which he can't, because it's the reason he's charged with lying to Congress, and that how usually that's not such a big deal, is because of later he said he never shared anything with anybody to then, and he was asked specifically by Chuck Grassley, shared anything with anybody that would then be later shared with the media. And he said no, and then he later testified that that was not the case that he did. And then they go through it here. Did willfully and knowingly make a materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statement in the matter with the jurisdiction of the legislative branch of the government of the United States. That's Congress. By falsely stating to U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley that he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source regarding person one. See, and this is wrong too, because this guy's an ex-FBI. Whether he was technically at the FBI is wrong. They can't even get the indictment right. That he was had a special employment situation with the federal government. And then Miranda Devine, I always call her Amanda, excuse me. Miranda Devine, this is a reckoning in James Comey's own making, and the Dems for weaponizing justice systems first. I'm not going to go into it. It's a great opinion piece. I'm not going to go into it. Basically, she says is that it's not just about this one crime of obstruction. It's all the things Comey had done up till now. He's a dirty cop, just like Trump says. On Biden's watch, Trump faced 4 separate indictments with 88 criminal charges. Unforgivable. And then we have Eric Swalwell. Democrats will target private citizens who work for Trump administration. So he's saying we're going to do it all over again because of what Comey's going through. And then I got a list here from Just the News. Here are the GOP senators who voted with Democrats against permanently ending government shutdowns. Of course, John Thune, Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, Roger Wicker. Yep, Susan Collins. There's the group there. Thune, Collins, McConnell, Murkowski. Shame. Shame. All right, up next, Trump is about to pull off the biggest federal workforce cut in history. That's the 100,000 federal jobs I told you about, all going to be replaced with AI, but they don't talk about that. I don't care about this because it's our tax dollars that pay for these folks. But the same thing is going to happen in the private sector. And then I want to go on a little bit, a couple minutes, already went too late. The Telegraph. Mormon church gunman was a Marine who supported Trump. Thomas Jacob Sanford, 40, killed by police after ramming truck into Michigan church, opening fire on worshipers. All right, this is another wind-up toy. He was in the service, and a lot of these cheap knuckleheads were already as sleepers, pre-trained, probably in the military through trauma-based mind control, and then just were needed to be triggered. And they trigger them a lot of times by putting on the squeeze and then flipping the trigger, pulling the trigger. So you put on the squeeze, what it does is create stress and tension. People get ready to pop. And so you go through the guy's life and you throw up roadblocks everywhere he turns. He gets so frustrated. Then all of a sudden you use a trigger and then he goes out and does something crazy. Or, have online friend sock puppets who use neuro-linguistic programming to get people to do what they got to do. And all they have on in this guy is that he had previously shown support for Trump. He wore a Trump t-shirt or something like that. But he didn't do it because of Trump. And he didn't target liberals or left wing. He targeted some Mormon thing for some God unknown reason. Like I said, he's another wind-up toy. You can wind up people on both sides of the aisle. It doesn't matter. You just have to be aware that if you're communicating with anybody, or if you're online, you're susceptible to this, especially if you're taking antidepressive or SSRIs or whatever. One American News, Michigan school shooting leaves 2 dead, 8 injured. Went over this guy. Yeah, he was a Marine. And then in One American News again, El Salvador President Bukele compares UK digital ID to the Book of Revelations, Mark of the Beast. We don't have to go into that too far, knowing that, yeah, any sort of score you're getting electronically is the Mark of the Beast. Digital ID is. There have been many articles on this today about the UK turning their back on their history of freedom and liberty. They're turning their back on that, and they're becoming authoritarian. As the whole West is, it's turning its back on its roots. This is an outlier. I'm sorry, I was supposed to have these together. New York Post, Michigan school shooter Thomas Sanford's family completely in shock. Deadly rampage. Yep, decorated Marine would have done something so evil. Yep. Trigger somebody to do something. Why would you do something violent? Why? I mean, you got to be really driven, really wound up to go on a violent spree. You know, you could do it death by cop, I suppose, or whatever. You're going to kill yourself. You're going to take as many people you hate with you. Really, this secular thinking, it's secular morals. I don't understand. Why would you go shoot anybody? It's unfathomable. Yeah, his son was under fire one time during his deployment in Iraq and said most of the time he was fine. Until they took him to a special room and taught him how to be Jason Bourne type, but it doesn't really work that way. You don't become a secret agent. What you do is you become a sleeper cell and you get activated whenever they want you to go up and shoot something. Investigators are still searching for a motive. And the issue with this is everybody saw this on TV. Chris Johns, 44, he was running for a city council seat in Stamford, probably as a Democrat, recalled a disturbing conversation with the deceased killer while canvassing the neighborhoods just last week. He was extremely friendly, and then took a sharp turn when he started talking about religion. He went off about Mormons. And how convenient, here you have this guy just happen to say this. Oh, okay. So if this guy's part of the conspiracy, there you go, case closed. He didn't like Mormons. Why he didn't like Mormons, we don't know. But you always have, like, it was the same thing with that, what was that, Minnesota shooter, the political guy, went and shot those Democrats. The roommate, the same thing. There was always a guy, you see it in Sandy Hook or with a lot of these things, there's always a guy that comes out and goes, oh, I was there, and ties it up with a neat little bow, and this is why he did it. Yep, he said he hated Democrats or whatever. Or yeah, he definitely, I'm surprised this guy didn't say, he kept talking about Trump and how Trump and all Republicans want to kill people. And then one last story here. The Globalist, if you know what this is George Soros's magazine. Are Americans becoming more docile than the Chinese? Are we moving to a curious sinification of the United States reflections that were imaginable recently? And then it goes, rugged individuals, really, indeed. Americans are supposed to be rugged individualists, valuing their personal freedom and independence above all else. Of course, they're going away from that because you go to college, you learn that that's bad, that being an individualist, you got to be a socialist, not an individualist. And then they pump you through hormone-altering drugs and telling you that being masculine is toxic. And then you got a bunch of low testosterone men walking around that aren't very aggressive. And so, hey, it worked. You became just like the Chinese. You think the Chinese know they're being poisoned with microplastics and chemicals? They're not allowed to. All right, thanks for joining me today. That was kind of longer than I wanted it to be. I only wanted to be half an hour. It's like 40 minutes. I don't know if it's even, I'm not getting a feed here, so I don't even know what's going through. So I'm going to be getting a new computer, but I'm also going to try streaming to another platform because it seems Rumble, it works good for a while, and then it totally doesn't, the stream doesn't go through. In any case, I will see you tomorrow, and then I think I'm going to be off Thursday, Friday. And then next week, I will start back with a full schedule, Monday through Friday. Live stream 10 a.m. on Rumble. All right, engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Respect.
The New World Order.
This is a conspiracy. That's what this is.